sharing your thesis. I think you did great, and I love to read your thesis document also last night. And I think what you try to say is really something that is matter in education, especially this is something what we believe as well in Christian classical education approach. But then, I still have questions. Okay, so can we start with the first one when you say about the uh, like the original purpose of the education? Can you share with us like then how does the ungrading will help to fostering a deeper understanding and mastery of subjects among students?
Thank you for the question. So I'd like to clarify first. Are you asking how ungrading would show the mastery of students?
Yeah, to help fostering the deeper understanding.
Also, how students would understand the lesson better through
Mhm.
ungrading?
Yeah.
Okay. So the thing about ungrading is that since it focuses more on the student, it would give more detailed explanations, not just through lectures, but through other methods, as I said before, like project-based learning, where students would be the focus and the part of their learning environment rather than just the grades or the material being taught. And I believe that that way, students would learn firsthand, through some sort of practicality, that how the lesson or the material works, and that should help deepen their mastery.
Do you think that it's going to contribute to be more holistic in education?
Yes, I do believe that.
Can you elaborate further? Why do you think it's going to be more holistic?
I believe that ungrading would help make it more holistic because of the sort of way that ungrading carries itself out. Ungrading does it in a way so that students would not have to focus too much on stuff outside of the learning and could have a more, in a sense, relaxed time, but still being forced to, not forced, but they're more willing to do things as they would be the focus and be doing the things that they enjoy, or at least doing things that they know would help them, rather than just thinking that, oh, I should do this for the grades.
Okay. What if we see students also that they love learning, but also at the same time they love to compete, not compete towards others, probably to themselves, like how to be better, and the aim and probably that they're going to feel satisfied when they see the grades. So what you are going to say about that kind of situation?
In regards to that situation, I believe that is correlating towards how grades themselves can motivate students. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, I'd like to clarify first that motivation actually consists of two different types. From my research, we have intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation being the type of motivation where students are willing to learn a specific topic because they enjoy the learning process itself. Meanwhile, extrinsic motivation being where they're motivated to do something because of external rewards or consequences. And in this case, grades themselves are extrinsic motivation because students want to do something because the grades exist there and they think, oh, I get a good grade, that's a nice thing. But I believe that education's focus shouldn't be like, I could get a good grade, rather I understand this and I enjoy doing it, so I look more into it. So I believe that viewing grades as sort of a reward and they enjoy it, that sort of mindset itself is already bad, and we should switch towards focusing on the material that's interesting and that we'd enjoy.
I like what you're sharing. By the way, I thought your presentation was fantastic, and I love this topic. I think it's such a great topic for us to have a conversation about. So I have lots of ideas and things to talk about, but let's focus on what you just were mentioning here. So let me ask you, do you feel that there might be a place, an appropriate place though, for extrinsic motivation? In other words, if we don't have any extrinsic incentives to motivate ourselves, do we ever achieve intrinsic motivation?
Thank you for your question. I believe that through intrinsic motivation, it is potentially possible for intrinsic motivation to be achieved. However, I sort of view this as the idea of, let's use this example of faith and good works. So there's this common saying how, oh, you need to have faith or you need to have good works, but in reality you have to have both, right? But some people think that if you have good works, you can have faith. But the reality is that through faith, you will automatically do good works. So I believe that if students were intrinsically motivated, then they would automatically pursue things, and sort of like as a side effect or like automatically cause, they would be getting the good grades as a result and be extrinsically motivated as well. But if the intrinsic motivation is the initial cause, they're not necessarily going to be intrinsically motivated.
I know what you're saying. C.S. Lewis writes in an essay, I think it's The Weight of Glory, he talks about that our life is like the student, and in the beginning, like he uses the example of learning Greek. And he says in the beginning, nobody enjoys learning Greek and learning all of the rules of Greek and has to, at first they're just doing it for the marks, for the grades, or maybe for fear of disappointing their parents, right? Some other motivation, right? But as the student progresses in the subject, he sort of talks about how at some point that something happens that the student is almost unaware of, where the enjoyment of the subject begins to take hold because he's able to read something in the original Greek. And suddenly, without him realizing it, he's enjoying that subject. But he doesn't really know exactly when that occurred. When did it flip from that extrinsic motivation to the intrinsic motivation? And C.S. Lewis uses that as an analogy for our lives, right? In other words, in the beginning, I obeyed God because I was afraid of going to hell, right? And so like, oh, I'm gonna obey God so I can do the right thing and I hope he accepts me, right? And you start kind of with this extrinsic motivation. I need to follow the rules of the law. And then somewhere along the way, love breaks through. And it flips my motivation, like you said, to where it starts to become the outflow of what I am instead of something that's externally being forced upon me. So I guess what I'm really wanting to ask about grades is, considering the nature of man, we're fallen, we're broken, we're sinful. I think we're just sort of lazy sometimes. I don't know about you, but I'm lazy. So I sometimes need something to like kick me in the rear end to get me going and make me do it. So do you think that we could have a balance of ungrading and grading? Is there a place for maybe both and, or is it either or for you?
I'd like to clarify first that ungrading and grades themselves, in a sense, could have a balance.
Okay.
But I'd also like to clarify that ungrading itself is not actually removing all grades.
Okay, that's important. So explain a little more about that, because I think that passed us by pretty quick. Because we keep hearing ungrading, which sounds like you're saying, do away with all grades. But I don't think that's what you're arguing. So help us understand that.
So in my definition, I clarified that ungrading does not remove all grades. Rather, it reduces them as much as possible, since obviously students and teachers could use assessment without grades. And the thing is that there is a difference between ungrading and non-grading.
Yeah.
There have been articles about non-grading where they completely don't use grades, right?
Okay.
Meanwhile, ungrading just takes them out when unnecessary.
Got it. I see what you're saying. So you're kind of, maybe, can I rephrase it? Maybe the argument is you're wanting to de-emphasize the place that grades have in the mind of the student and in the mind of the teacher, so that we can focus more on the learning process and the enjoyment of discovery and learning. Is that, yeah, okay. Totally in agreement with that. I love that so much. Okay, do you have another question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so may I now go to the challenge? Yeah, a little bit. Okay, so let's say that if we are going to transitioning, let's say, to the ungrading system, are there particular subjects or grade levels where ungrading might be more challenging to implement?
I believe that as people grow older and the sort of stuff that they have to learn becomes a bit more complex, it might seem difficult to utilize ungrading. Like, for example, in SOR, for example, you might think that it's hard to use ungrading because we have many different subjects that usually require grades, like math, sciences. However, I believe that although difficult, it is still possible to integrate ungrading towards a certain extent, where we could reduce the grades in certain classes, and even in classes like math and sciences, it's still possible to reduce grades when we don't really need them, but it will be harder, obviously, compared to the lower grade levels, where the main focus is learning and not really seeing our sort of output and progress. Yeah.
So do you want to say that in the grade 12, you need more grading system compared to the lower grades?
Although we might use more grades, I don't think that our grading system has to necessarily be more, because through those some subjects might seem that they require grades, unlike the lower grades. I feel that we could still implement ungrading in every lesson. So if the idea is like, do you think we should use ungrading in less lessons? No. But do you think the amount of grades that will be like existing, would there be more grades? Probably.
Okay. Yeah, because the next question that it's going to lead towards is, let's say you are going to go to university, right? Then as the next institution that will recruit you as a college student, do you think that they need the grading systems that in traditional we have compared to the ungrading system that you wish we implement?
So obviously it would be hard for higher education and other institutions to sort of accept high school students who don't have grades, which is the really good part about ungrading, as it doesn't require you to remove all grades.
Right.
So one thing that ungrading can do in SLR is that we can sort of remove grades on a daily basis. So for example, things like our math homework or your participations in class, the things you do on a daily basis basically, you don't really need grades there. However, in the end, you can use grades for like your final exams, because at the end of the day, all the colleges look at are your transcripts, which showcase one final grade. And I feel that you can find this final grade at only one or two, a few times basically. So the point is to have less grades compared to now in the daily basis. But if you still need a grade at the end to showcase the colleges or universities, then I believe that we could still do that.
So I want to ask you back to your holistic mindset, which I think is really the right mindset for education, because we want to shape and form a person, not just a computer, like a box full of knowledge, right? So I guess the question I would have is, how do you address the character and spiritual formation side of a student's life through ungrading? For instance, if we say, okay, we're going to do away with all grades, and there's just going to be one grade at the end of the semester based on this semester-long, project-based learning that we've done, i.e. the senior thesis. Is project-based learning, in case you weren't aware. Yeah. So if you're doing that, how do you help spur the kids on throughout a long year of doing something that's really hard and difficult? As you mentioned, there's times where it feels like you're kind of in hell,
Yeah.
But at the end of it, you can look back and be like, I think I learned something through this, and it really grew me, right? But how do you keep people going along if you don't have grades somehow attached, like to participation or something? I mean, what would you suggest?
I believe that in this case, the idea of student-centered comes into play, because obviously when students are not motivated to do stuff, it's hard for them to do the things that they do. And in thesis, the way I see it is that many students sort of struggle to continue, and you say that the grades like help them, like, oh yeah, I just need to get these grades, so they still do it. And while that may be true, still, like I said before, that is still extrinsic motivation. So I feel that students should find the topic that they enjoy, and if they really enjoy doing it, then they would continue to do their thesis without focusing on the grades.
Right. No, I mean, I think that's the ideal. I'm just thinking that not every person is is going to fall into that category, because maybe not everybody is ready for that switch to happen where it becomes that intrinsic motivation. So I'm saying from a teacher perspective, if you're managing a group of students and you have them at all different levels of where they are in their development of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, then what system could ungrading do that would help to bring those students that are still kind of not really, it's not internalized yet? How do we get them to start internalizing? What do you suggest?
I feel that as humans, as social creatures, we tend to really sort of build up on each other. And I feel that by using that idea, our peers can sort of motivate each other to sort of do what we need to do. And teachers themselves could also just like tell students like, oh, you should do this, we should do this together. And by having this sort of environment where everyone is doing the material and learning not because of the grades, over time, those that don't get motivated intrinsically will switch to also become like that.
Yeah, I think that's not a bad suggestion. I think if I'm remembering correctly, in your third action item, call to action, you said do it in community. And I think that community aspect is really important. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is the kind of thing we could probably talk about for an hour,
Yes.
right, or more.
I have lots more questions, but I'm
We've
trying
got
to let
lots
other
of questions.
people.
I've got lots of questions. I'll ask you one real quickly. It seems to me like to do this well, you're also kind of, the teacher has to be more one-on-one with the students. And so maybe you need a smaller student to teacher ratio so that teachers can really work one-on-one. Do you think that's right?
I believe that we don't have to necessarily always be one-on-one. Like if you're still having one teacher for a class of 15 students, it's still feasible. However, maybe we could have one-on-one discussions at certain intervals. That way teachers could spend more time with the student and still make time for other things. Like for example, I don't think we do it anymore, but back then, we used to have this time where students get the report cards, right? And the students had to come. But nowadays, they only meet the teacher if they fail on the lesson, correct?
Yeah, and I agree with you. I don't like that system.
Yeah.
I think everybody should come and have a
Yeah.
conversation about it. Yeah.
I believe that maybe instead of semesterly, maybe quarterly, each student could meet up with the teacher and they could sort of have a one-on-one discussion, sort of evaluating how they've done over the semester and how they could improve for the future.
Yeah, and one of the things that grades, I think, actually do, maybe accidentally, is it allows schools to hire teachers who are not really masters at a subject because they have a curriculum, they have some worksheets and things that they can put a grade on. It also requires schools to have better teachers, I think. Don't you think that's right?
Yeah, I believe so, because I'm not gonna name people, but there are occasionally teachers who, as I said previously, focus too much on the grade, that sometimes they just sit back and let the students do the work as they just grade. However, I feel that if the teacher were with the students, sort of guiding them, it provides a better environment for the students.
Yeah, and so I would argue that that's actually not a fault of grades, but I would just say that's actually just better teacher practices, pedagogy, and that's something we can improve. That I'm not sure that grades create that. I think that comes from a teacher's insecurity of not feeling like they're masters of that subject. And so that may be something that as a school we need to look at. How do we make sure we're equipping our teachers to feel like they can lead students well, right? Yeah.
I want to stick in one question that kind of comes from your peers, and it's about, and it's related to what we've already talked about, motivation. If we were to say, let's don't have grades next year or a lot fewer, don't you think immediately we would just have lazy kids who are cheering it on and let's don't do anything?
I'm worried about
Doesn't
that,
it take time to develop this, the mindset? Doesn't it start from the kids in grammar school and go all the way, and by the time you've got 12 years of that, you've got kids at senior thesis that really do run into thesis excited? What do you think?
I believe that if you want to implement ungrading on a stronger scale for smaller children, it would work out better. However, as I said previously, if we implement ungrading now, we don't have to completely change the curriculum. However, for students in senior thesis or SOR or SOL who are already catered towards grades, I believe that we can implement smaller steps by using more project-based type of learning and also having more discussions rather than just lectures.
Oh, I think that's fantastic.
So-
Can I add something? Or-
Time's
go ahead.
over,
Oh.
but you
Oh,
can add one.
Okay, I want to add just one thing because have you thought about how this relates to your career in the future? Because everyone's going to go be an employee somewhere, and if you're not the owner of the business, you're going to have a performance appraisal. And guess what your performance appraisal is? A score. And it's a grade. And it sometimes feels reductionistic. It can feel defeating, right? But at the same time, it also can be formative because your boss is giving you feedback. So, yeah, I just wanted you to consider, if we ungrade, what would happen if we did ungrading on a large scale and then we send kids out into the world and suddenly you have performance appraisals and you're, being told you're a 2. I don't know. What do you think that would be dangerous or how would that work?
I feel that if students went to the outside world and they're appraised by numbers through companies and businesses alike, that's something that the world has to slowly develop and change on its own. It's not going to happen over time. But obviously, as there are many businesses, you need data to sort of assess different people. However, in the world of learning, education, I believe that it is more solid if we implemented ungrading rather than data itself, because we're still learning. We're teaching a student how to learn, not how to take a test or get into a job.
Love it.
All right, great job, Nick. Thank you. Good job, friends and family. Get over here for photos.